So is anyone going to talk about this right here? This is Erika with Yair Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu's son. And now suddenly she's on Fox News speaking Hebrew, telling Candace Owens to stop.
It's evil. Charlie and I have always been very clear on our stance.
Woman is the neck. And the neck can make the head move whatever way she wants.
It started with a clip, just 17 seconds long, no context, no explanation, just grainy throwback footage that, according to some online users, was never meant to resurface. At first, it looked harmless. A crowded room, dim lighting, laughter in the background. But then the camera shifted, and that's when everything changed. A familiar face appeared, Erika Kirk, smiling, relaxed, but not alone, standing dangerously close to someone she was never supposed to be seen with. And in that moment, something felt off. The body language, the whisper, the way she looked around, almost like she knew, like she was hiding something. Within hours, the clip spread across the internet like wildfire. People began slowing it down, zooming in, analyzing every frame. And what they thought they discovered, it wasn't just awkward, it was explosive. Because if what people are claiming is true, then this wasn't just a random moment caught on camera. It was evidence of a secret, of a relationship that allegedly should have never existed. But here's where things get strange. The more people dug into that footage, the more questions it raised. And the deeper you go, the darker it gets. To understand why that 17-second clip caused such a storm, you have to understand Erika Kirk. Because this wasn't just anyone caught in a blurry video. This was someone who for years had carefully crafted an image, polished, composed, and almost untouchable. Erika Kirk wasn't just known, she was respected. At least that's what people believed. She built her presence slowly, strategically, from early appearances that felt authentic and relatable to a persona that seemed almost too perfect to question. In interviews where she spoke about loyalty, integrity, trust, values she emphasized again and again. And that's what made this situation feel different. Because if those values were real, then what people were seeing in that clip didn't quite align. But here's where things start to take shape. Long before that footage resurfaced, there were whispers. Nothing loud, nothing confirmed. Just quiet conversations buried deep in comment sections and private forums. People asking strange questions, dropping vague hints, suggesting that behind the scenes, things weren't as clean as they seemed. At the time, most of it was dismissed. Internet noise, baseless speculation. After all, Erika's public life didn't show any cracks. She appeared stable, grounded. Even her personal relationship seemed solid, or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. But then, small inconsistencies began to surface. Moments that didn't quite add up. Like brief disappearances from public view that were never explained, or interactions that seemed slightly too familiar with certain individuals. Nothing concrete, just enough to make people pause, and then keep scrolling. Because without proof, it was easy to ignore, until now. Because that footage, it didn't just bring back an old moment, it forced people to re-examine everything, every appearance, every interaction, every subtle detail that may have been overlooked before, and suddenly, the timeline started to look different. Because the person standing next to Erika in that clip, they weren't a stranger, not even close. In fact, according to online speculation, they were someone deeply connected to her inner circle, someone whose presence alone raises serious questions. But here's where things get even more unsettling. Some users claim this wasn't the first time they were seen together, and if that's true, then this wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, a hidden one. And that's when people started digging deeper. Old photos resurfaced, archived posts, deleted comments, even alleged screenshots that, according to some, were taken before they mysteriously disappeared. And piece by piece, A narrative began to form, not confirmed, not proven, but compelling enough to make people stop and wonder, what if this wasn't just a misunderstanding? What if this was something much bigger? Because if even a fraction of these claims are true, then that 17-second clip, it wasn't the beginning of the story, and it was the moment everything started unraveling. At first, it was just curiosity. A few people slowing the clip down, re-watching it, frame by frame. But then, something shifted, because the more they looked, the more details began to emerge. Small things, easy to miss at normal speed, but impossible to ignore once you saw them, like the way Erika leaned in, too close, too comfortable. Not the kind of distance you'd expect between casual acquaintances. And then, the hand, brief, almost invisible. But according to some viewers, it lingered just a second too long. That was the moment everything changed, because suddenly, people weren't just watching anymore, they were investigating. Online forums lit up overnight. Threads with thousands of comments began dissecting every second of that footage. Users started comparing it to older clips, public appearances, event recordings, even background shots from other people's posts. And that's when the first connection allegedly surfaced. The person in the video, some claimed it was someone named Daniel Reeves, not a random name, not an outsider, but someone who, according to speculation, had been orbiting Erika's professional circle for years. Always nearby, but never officially acknowledged. And here's where things get strange. Once that name entered the conversation, everything started to spiral, because suddenly people began noticing patterns. Old event photos where Daniel appeared in the background, group shots where he stood just slightly behind Erika, moments that, at the time, seemed completely normal, until now, because when you look at them differently, they don't feel random anymore, they feel intentional, calculated, unlike something carefully hidden in plain sight. And then came the timestamps. This is where things started getting unsettling. Users began lining up dates, comparing when Erika was publicly documented at events and when Daniel was reportedly seen in the same locations. Again and again, the overlap appeared, too often to be coincidence, according to some. But still, nothing definitive, nothing that could prove anything beyond doubt. And that's what made it so frustrating, because the deeper people looked, the more questions they found. Not answers, questions. Like why certain posts had been deleted, why certain tags no longer existed, why some images seemed to vanish entirely from platforms where they were once visible. According to some users, screenshots began circulating, allegedly showing interactions that no longer existed publicly. Comments that hinted at familiarity, inside jokes, subtle exchanges that, on their own, meant nothing. But together, they painted a very different picture. But here's where things take a darker turn. An anonymous account surfaced, no profile picture, no history, just a series of posts, short, cryptic, and deeply unsettling. The account claimed, without proof, that this situation had been going on for much longer than anyone realized. Years, allegedly, hidden behind carefully managed appearances, public narratives, and what they described as strategic distance. According to this source, the relationship wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, maintained in secrecy, protected by silence. Now, of course, there's no way to verify those claims, no evidence, no confirmation, but that didn't stop people from paying attention. And because sometimes it's not about what can be proven, it's about what feels possible. And this was starting to feel very real. But then something even stranger happened. The original clip, it began disappearing, not everywhere, but in certain places. Some uploads were taken down, others were muted. A few accounts that shared it reportedly went inactive, almost overnight. Now, that could mean nothing, just normal platform moderation or coincidence. But to some viewers, It felt like something was being controlled, managed, quietly, and deliberately. And that's when the tone of the conversation changed. This wasn't just gossip anymore. It wasn't just speculation. It was becoming something else, something heavier. Because if there was nothing to hide, then why did it feel like pieces of the story were being erased? And more importantly, who would want them gone? Because at this point, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a 17-second clip anymore. It was about everything surrounding it, the patterns, the silence, the missing pieces, and the growing sense that something wasn't right, but no one was prepared for what came next. Because just when people thought they were getting close to understanding the story, a new piece of information dropped. And it didn't just add to the mystery, it shattered it. The moment that new information surfaced, everything intensified. It didn't come from a major source, not a headline, not a verified report, just a leak. Quietly posted, then quickly deleted. But not before people saw it. Screenshots spread within minutes, allegedly showing a series of messages, private, direct, and deeply personal. Now, no one could confirm if they were real, no timestamps that could be fully verified, no official acknowledgement. But the tone of those messages, that's what shook people, because if they were authentic, they didn't sound casual. They sounded intimate, familiar in a way that didn't match the public narrative, phrases that hinted at history, at shared moments no one else was supposed to know about, and one line, in particular, kept getting repeated across forums. "We just have to be more careful this time." That was the moment everything shifted, because suddenly, the idea of a one-time interaction, it didn't hold up anymore. This wasn't being framed as accidental, it was being framed as ongoing, hidden, and potentially risky. But here's where things get even more complicated. Is because almost immediately after those messages began circulating, pushback started hard. Some users claimed the screenshots were fabricated, edited, manipulated, designed to fuel a narrative that had no real foundation. Others pointed out inconsistencies, fonts that didn't quite match, spacing that seemed slightly off, small details that, according to skeptics, suggested something wasn't right. And for a moment, it looked like the entire situation might collapse under its own weight, like it would be dismissed as just another internet conspiracy. But then another layer appeared, a second account, different source, different style, but telling a strangely similar story. This time, it wasn't messages, it was a voice note, allegedly recorded months before the footage ever resurfaced. The audio was unclear, distorted, but according to those who analysed it, the voice sounded eerily familiar. Some believed it was Erika, others weren't convinced. The clip was short, fragmented. But one phrase stood out: "If this gets out, it ruins everything." That was enough to reignite everything. Because now the narrative wasn't built on just visuals or text. It had a voice, emotion, fear, or at least the suggestion of it. And then everything spiraled. Online communities split in two. One side convinced something real was being uncovered, the other calling it a coordinated attempt to destroy someone's reputation. And in the middle of it all? Silence. No statement, no denial, no clarification. Erika Kirk said nothing. And that silence, it only made things louder, because people started asking, if this wasn't true, why not address it? And why not shut it down immediately? Why let speculation grow this fast, this aggressively? But then again, others argued the opposite. Maybe silence was strategic. Maybe responding would give the story more attention, more life. And that's when things took another unexpected turn, because someone, allegedly from within Erika's extended professional circle, decided to speak. Not publicly, not with a name, but through a post that many claim was quickly removed. According to screenshots that circulated afterward, the insider didn't confirm anything directly, But they didn't deny it either. Instead, they said something far more unsettling. People only see what they're meant to see. That single sentence, it hit harder than any leaked message, because it suggested something deeper, something intentional. Like the image the public had been shown wasn't the full picture, and maybe never was. But here's where everything becomes even more unstable. Around this time, older footage started resurfacing, not just photos, not just clips, but full-length recordings from past events, interviews, behind-the-scenes moments, and in several of them, viewers began spotting what they believed were subtle signs, glances, brief interactions, moments where Erika and the alleged individual appeared in the same space, but never directly acknowledged each other. At least, not obviously. But when you slow it down, when you watch closely, some claim it tells a different story, a hidden one, a carefully managed distance, close enough to stay connected, far enough to avoid suspicion, and suddenly everything started to feel orchestrated. Like this wasn't something that just happened. It was something that had been maintained, quietly, consistently, over time. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get more intense, a new claim dropped, one that didn't just add to the story, it threatened to completely rewrite it, because according to this latest wave of speculation, there may have been more at stake than just a secret relationship. Much more, and if that part is even partially true, then this situation, it's not just messy, it's dangerous. The story was already spiraling, rumors, leaks, disappearances. But then, the narrative took a turn no one expected, because up until this point, everything centered around one question: was there a secret relationship? But what surfaced next shifted that question entirely. And now people were asking something far more unsettling: what was being protected and why? It began with a document, not officially released, not verified, just a file that allegedly appeared in a private forum before being quickly removed. But like everything else in this story, it didn't disappear fast enough. Screenshots spread, fragments of text were reposted, and according to those who claim to have seen it, this wasn't about emotions, it was about risk. The document, if real, suggested that Erika's alleged connection to Daniel Reeves wasn't just personal, it was complicated, tied to overlapping commitments, professional entanglements, and something described only as exposure liability. That phrase, it changed everything. Because now the situation wasn't being framed as a scandal, it was being framed as a potential threat. And then a timeline appeared, not created by one person, but crowdsourced, built piece by people comparing dates, locations, and archived material. And when those pieces were put together, the picture that emerged was unsettling. According to online speculation, there were moments where Erika was publicly committed to one narrative, while allegedly maintaining a completely different reality behind the scenes. Events where she appeared alongside certain individuals, while Daniel was reportedly in the same city, sometimes the same building, never photographed together directly, but always close, too close. And that's when a new theory began to take hold, not confirmed, not proven, but persistent. Some believe this wasn't just about secrecy, it was about control, carefully managing appearances, protecting reputations, and possibly preventing something from coming out. But here's where things get even darker, because buried within those same discussions, another claim surfaced, one that, if true, would explain everything, and also make it far worse. According to an anonymous source, again completely unverified, there may have been a third person involved, not in the relationship, but in the consequences. Someone who allegedly had something to lose. Someone whose position, reputation, or influence could be directly affected if this situation became public. And suddenly, the silence made sense. Because if multiple people were connected to this, Then exposing it wouldn't just damage one image, it could damage everything. But then something happened that no one could ignore. A clip surfaced, different from the first, longer, clearer. But also, more disturbing, it showed Erika at a private gathering, different setting, different time. But again, the same alleged individual appeared in the background, and this time there was no ambiguity. At least according to some viewers, the interaction was brief but undeniable. If you believe what people are claiming, a look, a gesture, something that didn't feel accidental, something that looked familiar. And just like before, the clip began disappearing, taken down, restricted, flagged. Now, that could be coincidence, or enforcement, or something else entirely. But to those following the story closely, it felt like confirmation, not proof, but pressure. Like something was being pushed back quietly. And that's when everything reached a breaking point, because people weren't just speculating anymore, they were choosing sides. Some convinced this was a carefully hidden truth finally coming to light. Others insisting it was an elaborate fabrication built on assumptions and manipulated content. But in the middle of it all, one fact remained. No one had stepped forward to clarify anything. No official denial, no explanation, nothing. And that silence, it wasn't calming things down. It was making everything worse, because now, the questions weren't just about what happened. They were about what hasn't been said, what's being avoided, what's being left out, and most importantly, what might still be hidden. Because if even part of this is real, then this story, it doesn't end with a secret, it begins with one. And what comes next might be something no one is ready for, and then everything broke, not slowly, not quietly, all at once. Accounts started disappearing, and not just random users, but key voices who had been tracking the story from the beginning. Threads vanished, entire discussions wiped clean overnight. Links that once worked suddenly led nowhere. And for a moment, it felt like the internet itself was being reset, like someone was trying to erase the trail. Now, of course, there's no confirmation of that. Platforms remove content all the time, but the timing, that's what people couldn't ignore, because it happened right when the story was reaching its peak, right when the second clip began gaining traction, right when the pressure was building, and then silence turned into noise, mainstream attention, commentary channels, reaction videos. Everyone suddenly had an opinion. Some called it a witch hunt. Others claimed it was a long overdue exposure. And in the middle of that chaos, something even more unsettling happened. An account, previously inactive, posted a single message. No explanation, no context, just one line. You were never supposed to see that. And then, gone. Deleted within minutes, but not before screenshots spread everywhere. That message, it hit differently because it didn't sound defensive, it didn't sound like denial, it sounded like damage control, or worse, a warning. And that's when people started looking beyond Erika, because suddenly this didn't feel isolated, it felt connected, larger, like multiple people, multiple layers were involved. Some users began pointing out something strange. Certain names that had been mentioned early on, they stopped appearing entirely, as if they had been quietly removed from the conversation, filtered out, or avoided. And that absence, it was louder than anything else, because it suggested something was shifting behind the scenes, something we couldn't see. And then reports started coming in, unverified, fragmented, but consistent. Claims that individuals linked, loosely or directly, to the situation had gone silent. No posts, no appearances, nothing. Now that could mean anything. Coincidence, privacy, or simply stepping away from the noise. But when you look at it alongside everything else, it feels different, like pieces on a board, being moved or removed. And then came the reactions. Some of Erika's longtime supporters began distancing themselves. quietly, subtly, no public statements, just absence, no more interactions, no more visible support, and in situations like this, silence can say more than words ever could. But here's where things become almost surreal, because in the middle of all this chaos, a completely unrelated clip surfaced. At least that's how it appeared at first. Old interview footage. Erika sitting calmly, answering questions about trust, about honesty, about living authentically, and one line from that interview. It started circulating everywhere. If you build your life on something hidden, eventually it finds a way out. That line, it felt different now, almost like a warning or a prediction, and people couldn't stop replaying it, because suddenly it didn't feel like just a statement, it felt like context, like something we weren't supposed to connect. And that's when everything reached its most unstable point. No clear answers, no confirmed truths, just fragments, clips, messages, silences. And a growing sense that something had collapsed behind the scenes, even if we couldn't fully see it. Because this wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was confusion. It was contradiction. It was a story that seemed to be unraveling in real time. And the more people tried to make sense of it, the less sense it made. But maybe that's the point, because sometimes the truth isn't hidden by what you can see. It's hidden by everything that suddenly disappears. And right now, a lot has disappeared. The question is, was it ever supposed to be found in the first place? So here we are, a 17-second clip. A handful of alleged messages, fragments of audio, disappearing posts, silence where there should have been answers, and a story that somehow only gets more confusing the deeper you go. Because what do we actually know? Not much, no confirmations. There's no official statements, nothing concrete enough to close the case. And yet, it doesn't feel empty. It feels unfinished, like something is still being held back. Because if all of this was just coincidence, then why did so many pieces vanish? Why did certain voices go quiet? Why does every new detail seem to raise more questions instead of answering them? But maybe that's the real story. Not what was shown, but what wasn't. The gaps, the silence, the things that almost surfaced and then didn't. Because sometimes the truth isn't in the evidence. It's in the pattern of what's missing. And right now, a lot is missing. So the question isn't just, what happened between Erika Kirk and that mysterious figure? The real question is, who didn't want you to see it? And more importantly, why? Because if even a fraction of this is real, then this story isn't over. It's just been interrupted. And maybe that was always the plan. So now it's your turn. Look at the footage, read the claims, decide for yourself. But be careful, because once you start connecting the dots, you might see something you weren't supposed to.